Hey, welcome to the briefing. What I'm going to cover with you today is this: when competence becomes the punishment. This is a direct action mailbag episode, and today we are working through a real public sector leadership problem from someone who spent decades inside special education and related student services. She is describing an environment where experienced professionals were repeatedly handed more work, more travel, more administrative burden, and fewer choices, because leadership believed they would keep carrying it. I want to say this up front. I respect the person who brought this forward. This is not somebody asking for sympathy because the job was demanding. She already proved she could do demanding work. She carried the caseload. She drove the miles. She covered assignments other people could not handle. She completed the assessments. She attended the meetings. She raised questions. She stayed long enough to recognize that this was not one difficult season, one isolated assignment, or one supervisor having a bad week. She is describing a pattern. And the pattern is ugly. Leadership identifies the employees who are dependable, experienced, professionally committed, and unlikely to allow students to lose services. Then, instead of protecting those employees, fixing the workload, developing weaker performers, or making a hard capacity decision, leadership uses the strongest people as permanent overflow. The veteran became the district's emotional forklift. Someone else cannot carry the assignment, so the dependable employee inherits it. A new employee receives a preferred location, so the veteran keeps driving. The mileage plan needed a passport. Workload information already exists, but the experienced employee still spends hours completing another assessment that changes nothing. The form reviewed the form. She asked pointed questions, and rather than answering those questions, leadership begins examining the person who asked them. That is not simply poor workload management. No, let me make that more accurate. Poor workload management may be where the problem becomes visible. The deeper issue is institutional extraction. It is leadership consuming the strength of its best people because correcting the system would require courage, work, and personal accountability. It is taking professionalism, loyalty, competence, and concern for children, then converting those qualities into reasons to demand more. It is deciding that because someone can carry an unreasonable burden, the burden must be reasonable. That kind of leadership deserves direct judgment. It is wrong. It is unjust. And when leaders knowingly rely on an employee's professional conscience to keep an under-resourced system functioning, it becomes exploitation. We are going to pull this apart piece by piece because disgust by itself does not give you a navigation path. Anger can tell you that a boundary has been crossed. It does not automatically tell you what to inspect, what to document, what to challenge, what to elevate, or when to stop trying to rescue an organization that has decided your sacrifice is cheaper than leadership. So we are going to understand what this type of leadership looks like, why it survives, what it teaches the workforce, what it does to students and families, how it damages the organization several turns later, and what the person inside that system can do before competence becomes a sentence. Now, under normal circumstances, this is where I would slow the whole thing down and protect the unknowns. We would say we have the listener's account, but we do not have the district's complete workload model, assignment policy, union agreement, compensation schedule, service minute data, student complexity information, travel rules, staffing plan, disciplinary record, or leadership response. That is the discipline starting point. You do not turn one side of a difficult story into a verdict just because the story is frustrating. Different professions may properly carry different workloads. Speech-language pathology, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and classroom teaching are not interchangeable. A caseload number by itself does not prove equal or unequal workload. Service intensity, evaluation requirements, documentation, travel, scheduling complexity, preparation, meetings, family communication, and professional obligations all matter. Under normal circumstances, that qualification would control the rest of the read. How in the absolute hell ever? Not this time. This submission does not stop at workload comparisons and inferred motives. It includes direct messages, direct treatment, and reported statements from supervisors. It describes speech-language pathologists routinely carrying somewhere between 50 and 75 children, while occupational and physical therapists carried less than half that number. It describes speech-language pathologists being paid less while carrying more. It describes an experienced professional driving approximately 1,200 miles a month, while newer employees receive location choices. It describes 4 to 6 hour workload assessments repeated every 3 months, even though the organization already had access to statewide caseload information. It also describes unrelated meetings, continuing education that did not strengthen the actual role, a write-up after the employee asked pointed questions, and assignment pressure after she defended herself. It references an experienced teacher being removed after the workload became unsustainable. Then the messages go further. According to the submission, supervisors laughed in her face and openly said they would make more in retirement than they were making in the job. And my brain immediately cuts to their rusted district truck getting beaten with a toilet seat until the check engine light files a grievance. Then we come back to the evidence. That is not hidden motive. The quiet part grabbed a megaphone. We still will not assign that motive to every administrator in the district. That would be careless. But we are not going to erase direct evidence in the name of appearing balanced. To the leaders who laughed and said it, we do not have to guess what they were protecting. They told her. Their retirement had become the strategic objective, and the workforce was being used to carry the institution until they reached it. Impartiality does not require moral blindness. Once the evidence crosses the line, neutrality becomes cover. From this point forward, I am siding with the employees because the evidence supports them. This is an operating judgment, not a legal finding, and the operating judgment is clear. Leadership knew the burden was real. New experienced people were absorbing it and treated that sacrifice as acceptable because leadership believed it could outlast the damage. A difficult environment explains pressure. It does not excuse cowardice. I understand why a supervisor facing vacancies, student needs, family expectations, and fixed schedules calls the experienced person once. I do not accept doing it repeatedly while laughing about retirement and treating the employee's exhaustion like bridge financing. That is not triage, that is personal risk management funded by subordinates. The pension was running the meeting. Understandable and acceptable are not the same thing. CSA is where we slow the read down enough to see the whole condition. That does not mean we sit around admiring the problem. It means we stop the first visible explanation from becoming the only explanation. The visible problem is workload. One professional was carrying too many students, too much travel, too many administrative demands, and too much coverage pressure. When another employee could not carry the work, the experienced person received more. But workload is not the controlling failure. The deeper operating issue is that leadership built a service model around the assumption that conscientious employees would keep absorbing whatever the institution refused to distribute, resource, or control. This was not a temporary gap waiting for correction. It became the plan. The organization does not have to solve capacity because the strongest people keep preventing visible failure. Students still receive services, reports still get submitted, meetings still happen, routes still get driven, families still receive calls, somebody stays late, somebody finishes the documentation at home, somebody covers the assignment, somebody keeps the operation from breaking in public. From the executive level, the system may look functional. Green dashboard, gray staff, great success. From the employee level, the system is feeding on them. That difference is everything. Competent employees can hide weak organizations for years. They create the appearance that staffing is adequate. They create the appearance that assignments are manageable. They create the appearance that leadership decisions are working. The outcome gets delivered, but the organization does not inspect what the outcome cost. A leader looking only at completion sees success. A leader looking at how completion was achieved sees the failure. Ask how many hours moved beyond the normal day, how much preparation disappeared, how much documentation moved into the evening, how often breaks vanished, and how often a temporary coverage decision became a permanent expectation. If the work gets done only because one person keeps sacrificing more, you do not have controlled capacity. You have concealed overload. Capacity, now sponsored by unpaid labor. The high performer is absorbing the failure before leadership has to see it, and the evidence is being buried inside the employee. Now, we also have to separate trust from exploitation. Leadership may say, "We gave her more because we trusted her." Trust came with a longer commute. Fine, trust can explain why a capable person receives difficult work. Trust does not justify unlimited workload. If leadership genuinely values and trusts a high performer, the added responsibility should come with something: authority, resources, adjusted priorities, reduced duties somewhere else, a defined period, better support, recognition, compensation where appropriate, a voice in designing the work, a clear return point. If the employee simply receives another assignment because she handled the last one, that is not trust. That is extraction wearing a positive label. The employee's success becomes the evidence used to justify the burden. Leadership may point to the outcome and say, "She handled it. She always gets it done. She is our strongest person." Fine. At what cost? Capability is not empty space. A person temporarily exceeding sustainable capacity because the mission matters is not the same thing as available capacity. If leadership treats every successful rescue as proof that more can be added, it is burning through the very person it claims to value. Excellence earned another unpaid sequel. Three-dimensional consideration helps us see how the damage spreads across the personal, role-related, and organizational layers. At the personal level, the employee is carrying fatigue, anger, travel burden, reduced recovery, family impact, and the growing recognition that being good at the job has made her more vulnerable to the institution. And that realization hurts because you spend years building technical competence, becoming dependable, and learning how to handle the difficult cases. That should create earned trust, influence, development, and a stronger voice. Instead, it can create more work, fewer choices, and higher expectations with no matching authority. You begin to understand that every time you rescue the system writes the rescue into your job description. Some employees become angry, some become numb, some stop volunteering or lower their visible output because every demonstration of capacity creates another assignment. Then leadership complains that the team lacks initiative. Mediocrity found tenure without applying. Leadership trained them not to show it. Competence punishment does not only exhaust the strongest employee, it teaches the workforce that mediocrity may be protective. If you struggle, leadership may reduce the burden. If you perform, leadership may give you the struggle. That is not a talent system. It is a warning system telling people to stay small. At the role-related level, the burden changes the work itself. More students mean less preparation time. More travel fragments the schedule. More administrative activity consumes service hours. Unrelated meetings displace professional work, and continuing education that does not support the profession becomes compliance activity without capability. Documentation, family communication, evaluations, and coordination still have to happen, but the day does not grow because leadership added another assignment. Something gives. Preparation becomes thinner, documentation moves to personal time, collaboration becomes harder, and the employee works closer to the edge of attention. The work may still technically meet a requirement, but that does not mean the system is healthy. The work got done is a low standard when the completion was purchased with personal sacrifice. At the organizational level, experienced employees leave, and institutional knowledge leaves with them. New employees lose mentors. Remaining high performers inherit more. Recruitment gets harder. Onboarding consumes more time. Vacancies stay open. And trust in leadership falls. The organization may call that a staffing shortage. Part of it may be. But when leadership creates conditions that drive experienced people out, the shortage becomes a leadership product. The vacancy started recruiting replacements. Turnover creates workload. Workload creates more turnover. And each resignation is treated like it arrived from nowhere. Families may never see the internal assignment model, but they feel the consequences through changing providers, delayed responses, missed continuity, and thinner communication. A public institution can remain technically compliant while becoming less reliable, less humane, and less capable. These are children and families relying on the institution to perform work they cannot simply replace on their own. And this is where professional conscience becomes part of the trap. Good professionals do not want children to pay for leadership's failure. The speech-language pathologist does not want the student to lose service. The teacher does not want the classroom to collapse. The related service provider does not want the family left without support. So the employee absorbs the gap. Weak leaders learn that, and in this case, the quiet part did not stay quiet. Supervisors reportedly laughed in her face and talked about making more in retirement than in the job while employees kept carrying the operation. The subtext filed for a podium. Leadership knew the experienced professional was unlikely to walk away in the middle of a student need. It knew she would drive the route, fit another child into the schedule, finish the documentation, and protect the standard because the work mattered to her. The employee's ethics become the organization's capacity plan. The mission runs on guilt while leadership counts down to retirement. The pension became the operating model. I mean, think about how perverse that is. The institution places the vulnerable person between the employee and the boundary. The employee thinks, if I refuse, the student may suffer. Leadership thinks she will not refuse. That is not servant leadership. It is not teamwork. It is not flexibility. It is organizational hostage-taking through professional conscience. When leadership relies on a person's concern for children to avoid correcting capacity, it is weaponizing care. When it places the moral consequence of refusal on the employee while retaining authority over resources, staffing, and assignments, it is transferring leadership's burden downward. Pro is the central tool here because this decision damages people personally, damages the role operationally, and damages the institution several turns later. Personally, the employee may experience more than fatigue. She may lose trust in her own judgment because leadership keeps presenting the workload as normal. She may feel guilty for needing a boundary because students still need service. But professional responsibility does not require self-destruction. And commitment to the mission does not require loyalty to an institution that repeatedly refuses to protect the people carrying it. You can care about children, maintain your professional standard, and still leave an employer that expects you to finance its failure through unpaid time, excessive travel, and chronic stress. There's also a justice issue. Responsibility, authority, information, resources, preparation, and consequences have to remain connected fairly. If leadership controls staffing, assignment, priority, budget, travel expectations, and release from duties, leadership owns the decisions created by those controls. The employee can identify the problem, document it, propose options, elevate it, and state what cannot be completed inside available time. She cannot create another qualified professional because leadership refuses to reduce the workload. At the role level, Pro asks what happens to service quality, documentation, professional judgment, travel safety, and reliability when the employee always operates at the edge. It also asks what happens when the veteran has no time to develop the new employee because she is covering the work the new employee cannot handle. Leadership may think transferring work protects the newer person, but it can prevent development. The new employee does not build capability, the veteran cannot mentor, and the gap remains. Leadership has protected underperformance and exhausted competence at the same time. At the organizational level, Pro forces leadership to inspect turnover, recruitment cost, union escalation, reputation, service continuity, public trust, leadership credibility, and the quality of information moving upward. When employees believe hard questions create personal risk, they stop asking them early. They wait, document defensively, involve formal channels sooner, and begin managing the political risk of speaking instead of the operating risk they wanted to solve. Leadership then complains that the environment has become adversarial. Well, what did you think would happen? If informal honesty creates punishment, people replace honesty with formal protection. If verbal promises disappear, people demand written direction. If workload data produces no decision, employees stop believing the process is legitimate. The bureaucracy may be the workforce's scar tissue. Employees keep emails, mileage, assignment dates, caseload changes, meeting requirements, and written confirmation of verbal instructions because leadership taught them that memory follows power. The organization created the administrative burden it later resents. The paperwork formed its own department. Focused assessment helps us identify the first failure point we need to control. There are many issues here: caseload, compensation, travel, meeting load, continuing education, repeated assessments, union involvement, discipline, assignment risk, turnover, and leadership credibility. We cannot fix all of that with one vague conversation about culture. The first focus should be the mechanism allowing the system to continue. Unbounded workload transfer. When another person cannot handle the work, what happens? Does leadership improve training, adjust the assignment, reduce lower priority activity, add qualified support, change the service plan, elevate the capacity risk, establish a temporary condition with a return point? Or does leadership move the work to the strongest employee and call the problem solved? That is the first inspection. The next focus is the workload model, not only caseload, workload. A defensible model should account for student count, service intensity, evaluations, documentation, travel, scheduling complexity, preparation, meetings, family communication, coordination, administrative requirements, professional development, and complexity of need. If leadership cannot explain how those variables influence assignment, the organization may not have a workload model. It may have inherited habits protected by authority. If employees complete a 4 to 6 hour workload assessment every 3 months, leadership should be able to answer what decision that assessment controls, what threshold triggers action, who reviews the information, what options become available, who owns the follow-up, what changed after the previous assessment. If nothing changes, the assessment is not a control. It is administrative theater. The spreadsheet promoted itself to leadership. Actually, let me sharpen that. The organization is asking exhausted professionals to spend 4 to 6 more hours proving they are exhausted, then filing the proof and leaving the workload in place. The form survived. The employee left. For half a second, I picture that workload form behind the superintendent's desk wearing reading glasses, denying leave requests while the actual staff crawled toward the parking lot. Then we come back to the operating point. If the statewide database already contains caseload information, explain what additional workload factors the assessment captures and show how the information changes a decision. If the process exists only so leadership can say, we evaluated workload, then the process is cover for inaction. Deepen helps us separate the response paths. The workload design may need in-depth analysis because the organization needs a complete demand picture. The unrelated meetings, irrelevant continuing education, and repetitive assessments may need a surgical approach because specific burdens can be removed without redesigning the whole institution. The active overload may need tactical resolution. The employee cannot wait 6 months for a committee while carrying an impossible schedule now. Travel, assignments, meeting load, or lower priority duties may need immediate adjustment. The disciplinary concern and possible assignment pressure may require manual engagement through direct documented conversation with the proper authority. If service quality, professional obligations, or employee safety are seriously exposed, the organization may need critical intervention through the proper formal channel. This is not legal or employment advice. The exact path depends on policy, agreements, professional requirements, and jurisdiction. From a leadership and operations standpoint, the principle is clear. The response has to match the type and urgency of the failure. Do not use a broad culture initiative when one harmful requirement can be removed now. Do not bury an active service risk inside a future workload committee. Do not turn a workload design failure into a personality discussion because leadership is more comfortable discussing tone than capacity. That last move is common. The employee asks why assignments are distributed this way. Leadership talks about professionalism. The employee asks what changed after the workload assessment. Leadership talks about collaboration. The employee asks which duty takes priority because the available time cannot support all requirements. Leadership talks about attitude. The answer was reassigned for attitude. The operating problem disappears behind a conduct conversation. Now, tone does matter. A person can ask a valid question badly. A meeting can be disrupted. A frustrated employee can become sharp, repetitive, or confrontational. Being correct about workload does not make every communication choice appropriate, but leadership has a responsibility to separate the message from the delivery. If the delivery needs correction, identify the specific behavior, explain the expected standard, give the person an opportunity to adjust, then answer the question, and do not use communication style as the trap door through which the operating issue disappears. A question and answer session that punishes pointed questions is not really a question and answer session. The question got written up first. It is a leadership performance where employees are invited to participate only if their participation does not create discomfort. Leadership wants engagement without challenge, data without consequence, and feedback without obligation. That is cowardice. If you are a leader and a difficult question makes you want to investigate the person asking it, pause. Ask yourself why the question feels dangerous. Is the employee wrong? Show the evidence. Is the comparison incomplete? Explain the workload variables. Is the organization constrained? State the constraint, the trade-off, and the risk. Was the employee disrespectful? Correct that conduct specifically. But if you cannot answer the operating question, do not punish the person who exposed that. The leader with more authority has a greater responsibility to remain disciplined when challenged. Authority is not protection from discomfort. It is an obligation to handle discomfort without retaliating downward. ACE tests the explanations leadership may use to defend the current model. The first is trust. We gave her more because she was our strongest person. Fine. Did she receive authority? Did other duties come off the plate? Was the assignment temporary? Was she involved in designing the solution? Did she receive meaningful support? If not, trust is not the full explanation. The next explanation is that professions carry different workload structures. That may be true, and caseload numbers may not be directly comparable. Good. Show the model. Explain how service minutes, travel, evaluations, documentation, meetings, schedule fragmentation, family communication, and student complexity are weighted. If leadership cannot explain the model, the professions are different, becomes a shield rather than an answer. The model was decorative fiction. Another explanation is staffing shortage. That may also be real. Public sector leaders operate under budget restrictions, qualified labor shortages, service obligations, policy requirements, public scrutiny, and sometimes elected official pressure. There may be no clean answer, but constrained leadership still requires honesty. A responsible leader can say the organization lacks qualified staff, name the workload that exceeds the preferred condition, state what is being removed, define the temporary assignment, identify the support, set the review date, and elevate the risk. Pretending the workload is normal and disciplining the employee who says it is not is avoidance. ACE does not treat the retirement motive as vague speculation anymore. It narrows the judgment to the people whose own words support it. According to the messages, supervisors laughed in her face and said they would make more in retirement than they were making in the job. We should not assign that motive to every administrator, but we can assign it to the leaders who said it. They disclosed the priority themselves. Retirement became the mission. Employees became the carrying cost. The motive wore a retirement badge. TMC is where the person inside this kind of system begins protecting the message, the record, and the next action. The first rule is to stop arguing only from fairness. Fairness matters. Justice matters. But this is unfair is easy for weak leadership to dismiss as subjective. Build the operating case around demand, capacity, service quality, travel, documentation, preparation, turnover, and consequence. Instead of saying, you keep giving me too much work, say, the current assignment requires this number of service hours, this amount of travel, this documentation volume, these evaluations, these meetings, and these additional duties. the requirement exceeds the available work period, which responsibilities should be reduced, reassigned, deferred, or completed at a different standard. That question forces a decision. Do not quietly solve the arithmetic with your personal time. Every time an employee uses nights, weekends, skipped meals, and family time to make an impossible workload appear possible, leadership avoids choosing what matters. The employee makes the priority decision privately. The organization receives the output without seeing the trade-off. Make the trade-off visible. The next communication move is to request the workload model. What factors determine assignment? How are travel, evaluations, documentation, meetings, and service complexity counted? What threshold triggers review? Who has authority to adjust? What action follows the workload assessment? Keep the language calm. Keep it specific. Your objective is not to humiliate leadership. Your objective is to reveal whether the system has a defensible standard. If leadership criticizes your delivery, address the delivery without surrendering the issue. I understand the concern regarding how I raised the question. I will adjust that. I still need direction on how the assigned requirements fit inside available capacity and which responsibility takes priority when they conflict. That sentence matters because it refuses the false choice. You can own communication without accepting an impossible workload. And another TMC rule is not standing alone when the pattern affects multiple people. That does not mean building a hostile group, spreading rumors, or turning every complaint into a campaign. It means comparing accurate information, preserving records, and using established channels. If several professionals are carrying the same condition, leadership should not be able to isolate each concern as an individual attitude problem. The communication method matters too. Complex workload issues need documentation. Immediate service risks may require real-time communication. Assignment conversations may require direct discussion, followed by written confirmation. Broader patterns may require review through supervision, human resources, professional leadership, the union, or another appropriate channel. Do not rely only on a verbal assurance that can later become, "That is not what we said." To leaders, TMC creates the same obligation. If you add work, state what comes off the plate, name the duration, define the authority, explain the support, establish the return point. If nothing can come off, elevate the capacity risk. Do not hide overload behind words like flexibility, collaboration, dedication, or team player. Those words become poisonous when they are applied almost exclusively to the people already carrying the most. PACE gives the employee more than one path because walking into this situation with one plan is dangerous. The primary path is internal workload correction. Build the operating picture. Document caseload, workload, travel, evaluations, meeting time, administrative demands, and work completed outside normal capacity. Ask for the model. Ask which responsibility has priority when everything cannot be completed to standard. Request a review date and a decision owner. The purpose is not to prove that you are suffering. The purpose is to make the demand, capacity, and consequence visible enough that a responsible leader can act. The alternate path is supported escalation. If the immediate supervisor lacks authority, refuses to decide, or turns the concern into a character issue, move through the next appropriate channel. That may be a higher supervisor, professional lead, human resources, workload committee, union representative, or another established resource. Bring the operating evidence. Do not bring only anger. Anger may be justified, but evidence travels better. The contingency path is personal boundary and career protection. If the organization keeps increasing workload without changing support, the employee needs internal thresholds. What can you complete to standard? What cannot be completed? What professional requirement will you not compromise? What travel burden is no longer sustainable? What assignment change would cause you to request transfer, leave, reassignment, reduce schedule, or exit? This is difficult because the organization already has a contingency plan. Its contingency plan is your continued sacrifice. Their backup plan was your nervous system. You need one too. The emergency path applies when the situation creates immediate risk to student safety, professional obligations, serious service failure, or another condition requiring urgent formal action. The exact response depends on the organization and the professional requirements. The operating principle is that an employee should not quietly carry a level of risk they do not have authority to accept. PACE also reveals whether leadership is serious. A responsible leader engages with the primary path. A constrained leader may help elevate the alternate path because the problem exceeds local authority. A dysfunctional organization resists every path, personalizes the concern, withholds decisions, and increases pressure on the employee to keep carrying the load. That resistance is information. Brain asks whether continued effort inside the institution is likely to produce change. Is there a leader with enough authority and integrity to correct the workload model? Is the organization collecting data in good faith? Are coworkers willing to provide accurate information? Can the union or professional structure address the operating problem rather than only the disciplinary event? Then inspect the risks and alternatives. Assignment changes, relationship damage, continued overload, health impact, family impact, career pressure, and financial consequences all matter. So do transfer, reassignment, another district or public agency, private practice, contract work, a reduced schedule, a different professional setting, or another realistic transition. Not every option fits every person. The point is to stop acting as though staying and absorbing the burden is the only honorable path. Brain also asks what information is missing: policies, comparative workload data, vacancy information, authority levels, grievance procedures, professional requirements, financial readiness, and external opportunities. The employee may need support from the appropriate union, professional employment, financial, or other qualified resource before making a major move. Then comes the hard question. What evidence would convince you that leadership will not correct the pattern? People can stay in destructive systems for years, waiting for one more assessment, one more meeting, one more supervisor, one more promise, or one more year. The committee reproduced by mitosis. At some point, the pattern is the evidence. I care about this distinction because I have watched capable people stay too long inside systems that use their conscience against them. Sometimes leadership acts. Sometimes leadership has already answered through the pattern. You need the wisdom to know which condition you're in. FLS turns the chosen path into controlled movement. The intent is not to attack the organization. The intent is to protect service quality, professional integrity, employee capacity, and a defensible standard. The sequence matters. Establish the facts. Identify the decision maker. Request a specific workload or assignment decision. Document the response. Use the next appropriate channel if the decision does not control the risk. Reassess whether the organization is improving, stalling, or increasing personal pressure. Preparation matters because walking into the conversation with 20 years of frustration may cause the controlling point to disappear. That frustration is real, but leadership can use the size of the history to avoid the current decision. Start with the central issue. The current assigned workload exceeds available capacity. Leadership needs to identify the priority, adjustment, support, or accepted risk. The pay disparity, travel burden, unnecessary meetings, continuing education, and repeated assessments reinforce the pattern. They should not bury the immediate decision. Execution control means you do not allow the conversation to drift into defending every emotion, every historical event, or every coworker comparison. Return to the operating question. What is the workload standard? How is capacity calculated? Which requirement changes when demand exceeds capacity? Who owns the decision? Adjustment points matter. If leadership produces a credible model and makes a real correction, update the read. If leadership requests better information and explains how it will control a decision, provide it. If leadership removes lower value work, reduces travel, adjusts assignments, or establishes a temporary condition, recognize movement. But if leadership responds with vague professionalism concerns, Assignment pressure, discipline, or another data request with no decision rule, that is not correction. Recovery matters too. Even if the assignment changes, trust may not return because leadership says thank you. The employee may need a sustained workload reduction. Relationships may need repair. The person may need time to rebuild energy, professional confidence, and boundaries. Leaders need to understand that an employee who has been used for years does not recover the moment leadership stops adding weight. ALC asks what the institution should learn if it wants to stop repeating this. First, stop using completion as proof of capacity. A high performer finishing impossible work does not prove the work was appropriate. It may prove the employee protected leadership from seeing the failure. Second, measure workload, not only caseload. Count the full requirement, service intensity, travel, evaluations, documentation, preparation, meetings, communication, scheduling complexity, administrative demands. Third, every workload assessment needs a decision rule. The form outranked actual human evidence. What threshold activates review? Who owns the response? What options exist? When does leadership report back? Fourth, remove administrative activity that does not improve service, compliance, professional capability, or decision quality. Meetings need a reason. Continuing education should strengthen actual practice or meet a legitimate requirement. Assessments should control a decision. If an activity does none of those things, leadership should explain why it continues consuming capacity. Fifth, stop rewarding underperformance with protection while rewarding competence with overload. Employees who need development should receive development. Employees who cannot perform essential work cannot have their responsibilities quietly transferred forever. High performers may support development. They cannot become permanent substitutes for leadership. Sixth, protect questions. You do not have to enjoy being challenged. You do have to distinguish disrespect from truth. If the question is valid, answer it. If the delivery needs correction, correct it without bearing the operating issue. Seventh, inspect why experienced employees leave. Do not reduce every exit to workload, culture, retirement, or a better opportunity. Reconstruct what the person carried, what warnings were raised, what decisions were made, and who benefited from the employee's continued sacrifice. That is how an organization learns instead of replacing one exhausted person with the next. Now, I want to speak directly to the person who submitted this. You did not fail because you eventually stopped carrying an institution that would not protect you. You did not create the staffing problem. Your questions did not create the workload imbalance. Your boundary did not create the organization's lack of capacity. You carried the work for years. You drove the miles. You completed the requirements. You absorbed responsibilities that moved towards you because other people could not or would not carry them. You asked the questions. There may be parts of your communication you would handle differently today. That is normal. Reflection does not require you to accept leadership's false account of the problem. You are not obligated to sacrifice your health, time, dignity, and professional future so somebody with more authority could avoid a harder decision. To the employees listening who recognize this pattern, pay attention to the signals. If every staffing problem becomes your problem, competence is being taxed. If added work comes with no authority, no support, no relief, no recognition, and no end condition, reliability is being exploited. If leadership asks for data repeatedly but never changes a decision, measurement may be theater. If hard questions create scrutiny of the person instead of inspection of the system, leadership may be protecting itself. If new employees receive flexibility while veterans carry the hardship because leadership assumes the veterans will tolerate it, the institution is spending loyalty instead of earning it. Do not wait until you hate the profession before naming the pattern. You can care about the mission and still refuse an employer's exploitation. Those are not contradictory positions. To the middle supervisors listening, I understand the bind. You may not control hiring, pay scales, budgets, policy, or district-level staffing. You may be receiving impossible demands from above while trying to keep student services moving below, but you still own what you pass downward. Do not call the strongest person every time the system fails. Do not make a temporary coverage arrangement into a permanent burden because the employee handled it well. Do not ask for another assessment unless you can explain how the information will influence a decision. Do not punish the person who says what everyone else is afraid to say. If you lack authority, elevate the risk. Put the capacity problem in writing. State what the current staffing level cannot support. Force the decision upward. Standing between senior leadership and the workforce does not mean shielding senior leadership from the truth while passing every consequence downward. To senior leaders, executives, and public administrators, this is where I am going to be very direct. And to the leaders who laughed in an employee's face while talking about how much more they would make in retirement, pay attention. You told the workforce exactly what mattered to you. You made public service the waiting room between your current paycheck and your pension. The retirement plan had direct reports. My brain cuts to a retirement cake rolling down the hallway on a gurney while exhausted employees hold the building up with their backs and somebody from administration asks whether the frosting completed its quarterly assessment. Then we come back to the leadership failure. If your organization functions because conscientious employees are unwilling to let children lose services, you do not have a strong system. You have built dependence on professional guilt. They laundered failure through good employees. If you move work from employees who cannot carry it to employees who will, you are not managing performance. You are redistributing failure. If your best people keep leaving and your conclusion is that the profession is demanding, you are refusing to inspect your own leadership. Their resilience plan removed the resilient. If you require workload data and refuse to act on it, stop calling the process evidence-based. And if your private objective is simply reaching retirement without the system collapsing on your watch, say that plainly. Do not call it leadership. Call it what it is. Leadership became pension-adjacent furniture. If you use professionalism concerns, assignment instability, or discipline to silence legitimate workload questions, you are teaching the workforce that honesty is dangerous. That type of leadership is unacceptable. It is weak. It is operationally reckless. It is an abuse of responsibility when the leader holds authority over resources, assignments, and consequences, but forces employees with less authority to absorb the predictable harm. Laughing about retirement while employees carry the damage adds contempt to the failure. The contempt had a retirement match, and when the institution serves children or other vulnerable people, the behavior becomes morally repulsive because leadership knows good employees will take damage before allowing the public to see the system fail. You should feel disgust when you see that conduct, not because disgust is the solution. It is the signal that the line between difficult leadership and exploitation has been crossed. Impartiality ended when the evidence arrived. Then you return to discipline. Reconstruct the workload. Identify the hidden labor. Compare demand to capacity. Ask for the model. Ask what changes when the threshold is exceeded. Separate communication concerns from operating concerns. Use the appropriate support. Build a primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency path. Decide what evidence would demonstrate correction. Decide what evidence would demonstrate that the institution plans to continue consuming you. Then act on the evidence. The broader leadership lesson is straightforward. Dependability should create trust, influence, opportunity, and development. It should not create unlimited workload. Experience should make an employee more valuable. It should not make that employee the permanent dumping ground for every unresolved staffing problem. When leadership continually hands more work to the people who can carry it, competence stops being an asset and becomes a punishment. Eventually, the strongest people stop carrying the organization. They leave. Then leadership discovers that the people it treated as endlessly replaceable were the people holding the system together. The district ate its load-bearing employee. That is the pattern I want you to recognize. CSA prevents you from reducing the issue to one angry employee. Deepen helps you determine whether the condition requires analysis, targeted correction, direct engagement, or immediate intervention. Pro exposes what the decision damages personally through the role and across the organization. ACE challenges the excuses protecting the current model. TMC controls the message, ownership, and escalation. PACE gives the employee and leader more than one route. Brain tests whether continued effort is likely to create change. FLS moves the chosen path into controlled action. ALC prevents the organization from repeating the same extraction cycle with the next dependable person. The direct action system does not decide for you. It makes it harder for weak leadership to hide a decision inside vague language, empty process, or somebody else's sacrifice. To the person who brought this forward, thank you. This is the kind of real problem that helps other people identify the pattern before it consumes another career. You did not bring us a complaint. You brought us a clear example of what happens when an institution treats professional commitment as free capacity. Stuck on a leadership, operations, or decision-making challenge, send it in and we may break it down in a future briefing. Give me the role, the environment, the pressure, the conflict, and the consequence. Tell me what is happening, who is affected, what has been tried, what constraints are in play, what decision you're trying to make, and what a good outcome would look like. That gives us enough to build a useful read. Thanks for listening to the briefing.